Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. We're here with another creator-owned spotlight, talking about a campaign that's going on right now. I have the writer, Paul Eza, joining me to tell us all about Heroes and Zeros. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me, Jace. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear all about this. I mean, you and I have known each other for a while. Met through your wife, who Convention Squirrel, as she's known, always running around organizing conventions, and she's a great facilitator, helping creators meet fans and that sort of thing. You yourself are a fan. So before we get started talking about the book and what led you to creating it, give us your background. Did you grow up reading comics? When did you discover them? Favorites growing up? That sort of thing.
So growing up, I read comics with my dad. Sort of one of the things from my earliest memories that I remember doing just as a bonding thing. And frankly, we read them together well after I was capable of reading them myself, just because that was a thing that we did together. And so I started reading the things that, frankly, that he wanted to read, which was Superman, Batman, Justice League, largely. And so this is early 80s. You probably get a feel for who the creators were. Truth is, I didn't know at the time. I was not the guy who knew, page, line, artist, writer, any of that stuff when I was reading. I just knew I liked the stories. I love the characters. And I sort of fell out like a lot of us, I think, do over the years. And got a little bit back into it towards the end of college. And really one of the things that brought me back in wasn't comics per se, but it was a lot of the Peter David Incredible Hulk novels.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I started reading some of those, and I was really, really enjoying those storylines, and that led me back to the series that Peter did with George Perez, Future Imperfect.
Okay.
So from that point on, that was college, years later, and I was sort of, every now and again, I'd find something I enjoyed, but I wasn't huge into it. And then when I moved to Florida, met my wife, and like you said, she's all over conventions, and I think she knows everyone who's ever touched a comic book. And we'd start talking about it a little bit, and turns out one of her good friends was George Perez, as I'm mentioning this book that I had, and and that was one of the first conversations I had with her. I was like, "Do you really know?" We didn't know each other that well at that.
Yeah.
I was like, I couldn't tell if she really knew him or if she was just sort of, embellishing things a little bit. But no, she absolutely did, which I learned soon enough. And she brought me to my first convention. I think it was MegaCon 2010, and started meeting everybody. And from that point, these were now people that I got to meet as friends first, not as the heroes of my youth, which made it, I think, a lot easier for me to just be friends with them. But then I'm like, wow, I really want to read the things that my friends are doing. And I started digging in a lot more. Got to the point where I became not nearly as familiar as she is. She's always going to be much more of an expert on this than I could be. But, I certainly got into it a lot more at that point, and then started going back and reading some of the earlier stuff. I think that was actually the first time I read New Teen Titans from Perez and Wolfman, was some point after I'd actually met George. And of course, it was just mind-blowing even at that point in my life. So from there, like I said, I've gotten to meet a lot more people. I've gotten to read a lot more comics, and several years ago decided I wanted to try my hand at writing.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit. So, something that you shared with your father, which is really cool, that you have that connection with him. So, was there always a part of you that wanted to tell stories? So I know, for those of you that don't know, like, Paul's profession, he's a lawyer, right? So there's a lot that goes into doing that. And I think for a lot of people, maybe they have a dream of getting into a creative field, but, what circumstances, or maybe it's parents, a generation we were in, it was writing comics wasn't really something that like your parents. Oh, I'm so happy. They'd rather you be a doctor or a lawyer, or some sort of professional thing. That's just the way it was. It's now, granted, it's a little more acceptable now, thank God, to go into the creative fields, but it is still tough. So you got the itch a few years ago to actually start thinking about this and knowing you could make a living having met these other creators and knowing them as friends. Was there ever an itch before that, or ever an inkling or a thought of being a storyteller or doing something creative?
Absolutely. Even back in high school, I would do creative writing just for myself. I'd write short stories, exceptionally bad poetry, the things that we all do probably in high school at some point. But I do remember specifically writing some of the short stories that I don't think were half bad. And then as I got sort of into college, and I was going into advertising was my major as an undergrad. So my thought was, it's too much of a chance to actively pursue something creative. But this kind of takes that creativity into more of a commercial direction. And of course, I never ended up doing advertising. I actually went into production, graphic design out of college. And then, life happens. I was busy. I was stressed. I was not always in my happiest spot at that point in my life, and I just didn't really continue to write creatively for myself at that point. And then at that point went to law school, and you're doing creative writing, but it's a different kind of creative writing.
Right.
But I do think that it helps as far as storytelling, because when you're learning to present a case to some extent to a judge, learning to present a case to a jury, it's very much not a, straightforward, here's the facts, point A to point C, and then you're done. You've got to create a narrative. You've got to create kind of a hook to the story, because that's, six strangers in the jury box don't actually care about what's going on in front of them. They just couldn't get out of jury duty for the most part.
Right.
They don't want to be there. So you've got to do something to keep them interested in what you're saying. Not because you're not saying something interesting or saying something important, but because you want them to actually hear what you're saying. So there is an element of that to being a lawyer, but it is a little bit different. So when I started doing this kind of writing, it almost put together kind of all those different things that I've done in my life with, the advertising, sort of thinking of what's the hook, what's the one thing, that the one line or the one image that's going to get people really drawn in. How do you craft the narrative so that they're going to come along with you at the pace you want them to come along? And so it kind of gave me that base where I feel like I wasn't just starting from scratch as somebody who's never actually written a comic before.
That's fascinating. I've never thought about it, but you're 100% right. It doesn't really affect their lives. They technically don't. They're not invested in it. You got to make it relatable. You got to make the case, something that they can understand. And obviously, probably the most successful, at least current writer, comic book creator that was also a lawyer. I don't know how much trial work he did though. Is Charles Soule. He's a friend. I'm sure you know Charles as well. Have you ever talked to him about the similarities?
I actually don't know him particularly well. I think Constance does know him better, and they've spoken, but not necessarily about this. I've met him once or twice in passing, and it was long before I had told anybody I was even thinking about writing something. Gotcha. So I hadn't had that conversation with him. I also remember meeting Marjorie Liu.
Okay. Yep.
And that was at Fan Expo Canada several years ago. And I think that was right when I was just starting to think, like, I don't want to keep being a lawyer. Is there something, like, comics seem kind of kind of fun. I was starting to get the itch at that point. I don't remember if I'd actually started jotting down ideas or not. But I just remember walking with her, I think either from a panel or to a panel, something like that. And I was like, so what was that point in your life where you're like, you know what, I'm done with this lawyering thing. I'm gonna jump in full steam ahead on writing. She's like, oh, it was when I sold my first book. I guess that would probably do it. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know Charles. Him and I have talked about it. He kept doing the lawyer thing, at the same time, and he was writing a ton of books for a long time. And finally, he just the writing. I think when he took over, started doing the novels as well for the Star Wars New Republic or High Republic, whatever the newest iteration is. That's when he finally closed his law firm. But yeah, I mean, it's something to think about for sure down the line. We'll see how successful this is, your first foray. Heroes and Zeros, which is a campaign that's going on right now, everybody. There's a link down in the show notes. Highly encourage you to go and check it out. But Paul, why don't you give our listeners and our viewers an idea of what the story's about? Have you worked on your elevator pitch for this yet?
I've worked on it. I still don't know if it's any good, but I've worked on it quite a bit. So the tagline I've been using in a lot of this is X-Men meets Scooby Doo. It's set several hundred years in the future, and it's a world where humanity has evolved, and now the majority of people have at least one enhanced ability. So one superpower. Some have two, some have three. Very, very few have four. And then there's some still with zero. And those are, again, known in society as the zeros. And I started to think, how would society be reformed if this were the case? And so we have people who are working jobs based largely on what their ability is. And, on that cover, that beautiful cover up in the corner here, that Kasey drew, you see a delivery guy flying up to the second floor window to deliver a pizza. You can see, I believe there's somebody welding something with their heat vision, and another delivery person running at super speed. The strong man dumping out the trash. So all sorts of things like that. And then the next question is, so what happens if you don't have an ability? Where does that leave you? And it kind of leaves us in a society where folks who don't have some sort of ability are not valued. And we have our three main characters, our three zeros, who all approach that a little bit differently, and then are thrust into sort of the center of this major adventure, major mystery, and they have to kind of navigate it, and ultimately, can they turn out to be the heroes of the story?
Yeah, and you mentioned Scooby Doo, right? So there's a mystery aspect to it. There's something that happens in the story, and then these three zeros have a chance to be heroes, maybe not in superpowered sense, but just in the sense of accomplishing something. But one of the things, I go to a Kickstarter page. First thing I do is look at the visuals. You kind of scroll down, check out the covers, what have you, and then go back and, okay, let me see what it's actually about. I saw the cover B, the variant cover, and I got a Scooby Doo vibe right away. You mentioned it in your elevator pitch. And that was what really hooked me. I'm like, oh, that cover's so great. I love Scooby Doo. Love the idea of mystery. Let's mix in some superpowers. When you're describing this, as X-Men, Scooby Doo, and everybody has powers in the future, or the majority of people have powers in the future, you really could have gone a lot of ways. You could have gone super serious. You could have gone more dark. What made you decide to kind of go with this, almost animation style and story where things are, a little brighter, even though it is a mystery?
Sure. And by the way, shout out to D Fish for that Scooby Doo homage cover, because we've got three covers on this, and I absolutely love all three of them. I just teased the Tom Rainey cover today. But to answer your question as far as the direction I was going in with it, that sort of goes to the kind of comics that I tend to enjoy. And that's not to say that, if something that's a little grittier or a little darker, I love a lot of those as well. But for me, and kind of going back to that nostalgia, that feeling of that I had reading those comics with my dad, it was always a little bit hopeful. It was always, a little bit brighter from the approach to it. So I did want this to be accessible for, I wouldn't necessarily say it's for all ages, but I don't think it's inappropriate for any age. Like, I don't think a 6-year-old is going to pick this book up and suddenly read something that's going to have their parents covering their eyes up or ripping it out of their hands. It might not necessarily be as entertaining for them, or there might be some things that go over their head with it. But I did want it to at least be accessible for pretty much any age group, while still being entertaining for readers my age and readers, pretty much of all ages. I think when I focus in on a specific demographic, I was thinking more like older teens in high school. But then again, I think of some of the entertainment I've seen over the years that was technically for, that age group. I'm like, some of those are the best stories I've read.
Yeah.
Or some of the best stories I've seen in shows or movies or whatever. And so that sort of can transcend any particular age group, and that was really what I was going for with it. Plus just trying to write something that I would want to read.
Yeah, I mean, you really succeeded. For the preview that I got to see was amazing. I can't wait to get more of the story. And we're going to talk a little bit about your collaborator on the series and how that collaboration came out in just a second. But I do want to take the chance to remind everybody, again, there's a link in the show notes. You can go check out the campaign. And I think it's just amazing, very affordable. But the other thing, like maybe everything that Paul's saying is like right up your alley. Oh, man, I'd love to be part of the campaign and get this book in my hands and what have you, but maybe times are just tight. You just don't have the means right now. The other way you can help out Paul and his collaborator, Kasey, other than joining the campaign and getting this great book, is just to share it on social media, right? Put it out there on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, let your local comic shop know about it, what have you, tell your friends that read comics. Because as I always say, the worst thing about a Kickstarter is to find out after the Kickstarter is over that you really would have loved to have this book, and then, maybe you can find it on eBay, maybe you have to pay a lot more, maybe you never find it at all. That sort of thing. So, yeah, just share it on social media. Obviously, if you have the means and you want to join, then you have that option after you pledge to share it on social media right from the Kickstarter page. So just keep that in mind, everybody. But, yeah, let's talk a little bit about your collaborator here, the artist on the series, Kasey Quevedo. Am I saying that right?
I believe it's Quevedo.
Quevedo, okay.
But I'm sure he will tell me if I'm saying it wrong. Too, because as many times as we've talked, I don't think we've ever gone over each other's pronunciations. So
Gotcha.
It is entirely possible I'm saying it incorrectly.
Well, how did you find it? Did you find him on social media?
I found him. I found him on back in the glory days of Twitter, I guess. Before the current times, and. It was, I started thinking, I was at a point with the script where I said, I need to start bringing somebody in on this. And, I know I mentioned a lot of the folks I know. But as a writer, they know me as a friend. They don't know me as a comic creator. And I did not want anyone to be in a position where I was coming up to somebody, some like Eisner Award-winning artist, like, you want to write my comic book for me?
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of that is also probably just, our own psyches and our own fears. But I didn't want to put anybody on the spot and make them feel like there was any kind of pressure on them to do it as a favor, if that makes any sense. So I did this. I went out and I was looking at, they would do Portfolio Day on Twitter, and I'd see just an absolute ton of artists out there. I started paying attention and watching, and I started making lists of artists that I really, really liked. And I was looking for people who were kind of versatile in their style, were good visual storytellers. That was one of the first lessons I learned when I started talking to actual, comic pros, is it's better to have a solid visual storyteller than someone who's a technically proficient artist. That's not saying Kasey's not a phenomenally proficient, technically artist. He is, but he's also a fantastic visual storyteller, and that was the more important of those two things. And so he was on my short list. There were several others that I was looking at, and a couple that I reached out to. just from some of the back and forth doing some test pages, some character design. He kind of got the feel for the book like instantaneously. I had sent Kasey just sort of the first issue script and said, "Hey, just can you draw these four characters?" I included the dog. Draw these characters how you feel they would look based on personalities, based on what you're reading. He drew it. It was almost exactly what I was thinking it should be. I sent him a couple of quick notes, sent it back, and those are the characters that are on that front cover.
Wow.
And so, we clicked creatively almost immediately. And so when it was time to start moving forward with pages, reached out to him again and said, "Hey, are you interested in this?" And kind of went over some of the details of it. And he was, truthfully, I think he was a little skeptical at first because, again, who is this guy? I've never met him. I'm not sure what this is going to be. But sure, why not? It seems fun, and we were getting along pretty well. And I was paying his page rate, so he was fine. He was good with that. And so we started working on it, and he's been amazing to work with because and I think I was upfront with this from the beginning. I've always wanted a collaborator. This is not me dictating exactly what it's supposed to be. I wanted to bring somebody in because they were better at this than I am as far as the visual storytelling aspect of it. And a lot of what you see in those pages was not originally what was in the script. And that's a direct result of Kasey just saying, "Hey, I think it works better if we do it this way." And 90% of the time, he was absolutely right. Sometimes we'd have a little discussion about back and forth, but the vast majority of the time, what he suggested is what we end up going with, and it is 100% better than what I would have put in the script originally.
So he's got the broad strokes of the plot, and then you're sending him the script, and you guys are really working out the story and the beats and how things go together, right?
To a certain extent, I think what you're talking about is like the old school Marvel method, and that is not at all how I wrote it. I definitely wrote, panel description,
gotcha,
dialogue, everything. But I didn't know what I was doing. As much as I tried, as much as I had looked at all the resources, there were definitely times where if we had tried to squeeze in that much dialogue on one panel, there would be no room for art. It would have just been, or I put, 3 actions in one panel. It's like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
We're going to break this up here. And as soon as you are correct, and I'm an idiot, and thank you for pointing that out. And it's just, like I say, it's worked out phenomenally well. And because this has been such sort of a, slow cooker type of thing, we've been working on this together for a couple of years now. And I've never met the man in person, but I consider Kasey a friend. I can't wait to be able to meet him in person. We've spoken numerous times, phone, text, what have you. And I couldn't have gotten any luckier finding the co-creator for this. And he really is, I had written out the story. He is the co-creator. This would not be what it is without him.
So is this self-contained? The campaign is the whole story from beginning to end? Not that you couldn't tell more stories in this world, but is this, if somebody gets this, they get the whole story?
This campaign is the first chunk of story.
Gotcha.
And so it is standalone, and it is, I think it does hold up as a story all on its own, but there's more to it. So when I started writing it, I wanted to prove to myself that I would keep writing it, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so I ended up writing it initially as a 6-issue miniseries. And then through various edits and edits, suggestions, everything else, it ended up getting made into 3 double-length books. So, and each book, again, is its own adventure and its own story, but it all builds to that third book where everything resolves.
Gotcha.
And as you go on, you learn some things, and then there's going to be new mysteries that you find, and it just keeps leading you further and further down the rabbit hole.
So in terms of production, how far along are you and Kasey? Is this thing ready to go? Sometimes Kickstarters are ready to go when the campaign's done. You just have to send it off to the printer. Sometimes Kickstarter is helping to subsidize, pay the artist, and that sort of thing. So where are you in terms of production for the campaign?
So for this book, the first 46-page installment, and all 3 scripts are done. Now, I'm sure books 2 and 3, the scripts will still get some edits to them, but all 3 scripts are done. 23 of the 46 pages are 100% finished. 12 are inked and currently with our colorist, Maya. And then Kasey's currently plotting out the remainder. And he is a pretty quick turnaround. Most of the delays on this have been on my end, and sort of what you mentioned, getting the funding up front.
Right.
Because I'm not asking somebody to work for free.
Yep.
Basically. But we're there, and we have everything ready to go for it. And my expectation is that all the pages will be done, and the entire thing will be ready to go to the printer by middle of May, early June at the latest.
Well, fantastic. We know it's already funded, everybody, so that's the other aspect of this. If you go and you join the campaign, congrats on that, Paul, for your first one.
Thank you.
That's a huge accomplishment. But for all you listening and watching, this is one of these situations where you go and you pledge, you're going to get the book because it already is fully funded. And if somebody does want to get the book, there's digital rewards, there's obviously hard copies, variant covers. Go over what some of the tiers are that are available, Paul.
Sure. We've got, like you said, we've got the digital, and that's, so we've got digital, we've got cover A, which is the one that Kasey did and Maya did the colors for. We have cover B, which is the D-Fish cover, the Scooby Doo homage. We have cover C, which is the Tom Rainey cover, which is, I don't know if you had a chance to see that when it came today, but it's you see Officer Jacobs busting through the window on one of the pages that's here. He's our primary villain in book 1. He's the one that's chasing the Zeros, that's chasing the accused murderer. And one of his ability is unbreakable skin, which is why he's able to bust through windows like that. So he's featured on Tom's cover, busting through some glass and coming straight for you, with some shards of glass flying at you as the reader.
Nice.
So those are the 3 covers, and then there's a tier where you can get all 3. For the completionists out there, or if they're just all cool and you can't decide which one, go ahead and get all 3. And then there's a tier above that for just super collectors or comic shops or whoever's out there, that includes 2 copies of each cover. And each of the physical tiers also includes a digital version. We've now unlocked our first 2 stretch goals, which is prints of Kasey and Dee's covers. The next stretch goal is going to be a sticker set featuring some of the characters. After that, it's going to be a print of the cover that Tom's doing, and colors on that one are going to be Tom's wife, Gina Going. And if we get to the final stretch goal, that's the 2-page bonus story by Gail Simone.
Oh, that would be really cool. Gail, everything you've told me about this world, Gail would be perfect to write a story with these.
Is there a world Gail's not perfect to write a story for?
Yeah, you're probably right. She's always got a take. She's always got some kind of an angle to tell a fantastic story. Well, congrats again on it funding, Paul. Really encourage everybody, go click the link in the show notes. give it a look. Take just a minute to go see if it might be for you. And if it's not, or like I said, you just don't have the means right now, just please share it on social media. If it's not for you, maybe to be for somebody else that you know. Let's kind of finish up with this, Paul. I am sort of curious. You loved comics as a kid with your father, kind of came back in through it with your relationship with your wife. Backdoor, if you will. I know you know the cliche of there's always a different way that people get into to becoming a creator. Was there anything about this process that was more challenging than you anticipated, or was it just that initial taking the plunge that was the hardest?
I think the hardest part for me, because I had the benefit of, like you said, I mean, I've been practicing as an attorney. I'm currently a mediator. I opened up my own mediation practice last year. So I'm my own boss now. Nobody can yell at me about how much time I'm spending in the office anymore. So I had the benefit of not having this as, this is going to be my career and I'm going to make this happen and this is how I have to make money. So I could take my time with it, and that's what I did, and that's one of the reasons it's taken. I think I started writing 7 years ago.
Wow.
The very first script that has absolutely nothing to do with what the story ended up being. And it allowed me to sort of figure it out on my own and tweak the story until it was the absolute best story that I could write. And the hardest part was telling people. Was putting myself out there after not having written any kind of creative fiction, lawyer jokes aside, no creative fiction for probably 20 some years. And to actually reach out to somebody and say, I wrote this, what do you think? And the first person that I did that I reached out to was Devin R. Scott, who's the editor on the book. And bless him, he was so incredibly kind, again, to somebody I met through social media, but otherwise was a stranger. And kind of, was encouraging, gave me some really good feedback on the first script that I had sent over to him, and basically just gave me the confidence that I could do it, and it was going to be, it was going to be good. And then the next part of that was after I had finally gotten to a point where I had, a script and some preview pages and a very, I guess we'll call it a pitch, but I don't think that's what it ultimately was. But we had something together, and then I had to show my wife. And even though she has never once made me think that I had any reason to think that she wouldn't be entirely supportive no matter what, there was still that part of me that's like, I don't want her to be supportive because I'm her husband. I want her to be supportive because she actually likes it.
Right. And
I don't know if she'd tell me if she didn't. And if she did tell me she didn't like it, that would probably be the end of it. I would probably put it in a drawer and never show anybody else. and go back to being a lawyer and a mediator and all that. But luckily that was not her reaction. And that's really what started, just put it into overdrive and said, okay, this is something I'm going to do.
Well, yeah, you had extra pressure being that Constance, your wife. If I write a comic, I go show my wife. She doesn't live in that world. She hasn't read, hundreds of thousands of comics probably is how many Constance has read. So, yeah, I mean, you had the extra pressure. She's really an expert in the field. And so, yeah, if she didn't like it, that would be kind of tough. I can imagine.
Well, and then this was right before MegaCon last year. And then we're out to dinner at MegaCon with several friends who are pros. And we're all sitting around, and she's like, Paul wrote a comic book.
On the spot. But yeah, on the spot.
You've sold how many awards? And please don't laugh at me.
Yeah, I got it.
But again, these are friends, and and of course they've all been incredibly supportive, and and especially the professional friends, the ones who are in that world as far as creating. Not only have they been supportive, just but they've also been supportive in giving feedback and constructive feedback in ways that I've been able to make it better and help me kind of shape, and fine tune the story. It was good when I showed them. It's really good now, thanks to what a few of these friends have been able to share with me and a few of the tips that they've given me.
Yeah, and I'm sure from their perspective, they're like, thank God it's good. Because I've met creators that are just starting out, other creators, and, got to know them as friends first and then seen the work and, and they want me to review it or critique it or what have you. And, man, I like this person so much. Please let it be good. Please let it be good, because if it's not, I'm going to have to be honest with them. But, oh, man, I don't want to, hurt anyone's feelings or what have you. So it is fantastic, Paul. So everybody, again, link in the show notes. Go and check it out. If anybody has any questions or wants to follow along, know when stretch goals are unlocked or what have you, do you have a presence on social media, Paul? Is there a place that people should follow you?
I do, yeah. And on Twitter, on Instagram, on Threads, you can find me at EZAESQ. And you can also find me on Instagram and Threads at Acorn Comics.
Got it. So I'll put links to the social media in the show notes, everybody, as well. So if you're having trouble finding Paul, have a question, what have you, you can go and look there. So as we're winding down here, Paul, anything else you want to share with our listeners and viewers?
No, I think we've talked about most of it, but thanks again for having me on, and for everybody who's watching, please go check it out. Look at it. I think it's got a little bit of something for everybody. There's adventure, there's mystery, there's humor. And I think there's something that just about everybody can relate to. And like I say, if it's not for you, that's okay. Not everything's for everybody. Share it with friends. Share the link. And thank you all for giving it a shot.
Yep, 100%. So, and we also want to thank you for joining us as always. We appreciate the support, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.